A terrible tragedy has occurred during the Hajj. Official figures estimate that a stampede during this important spiritual pilgrimage has killed hundreds. Unofficial figures are much higher than that, with thousands injured or killed in the uncontrolled chaos which led to the deaths of so many pilgrims. The Iranian authorities believe that around 500 Iranian citizens have lost their lives in the mayhem. Yet Saudi Arabia seems unmoved. Its officials have sought to deflect the responsibility away from themselves and towards other factors, including God himself, as the reason for this enormous death toll. The apparent lack of concern has caused some commentators to compare what happened during the Hajj with what is happening in Yemen, where the death toll has exceeded 6,100. Why have the Saudi authorities played down the death toll? Why have they refused Muslim-majority countries permission to identify the dead bodies? And why have government officials refused to accept any responsibility? These are the simple questions we sought to answer. And we began with this. The Hajj death toll has now risen to several thousands. Why does Saudi Arabia blame the pilgrims, despite international crowd control experts saying the buck always stops with the host, not the visitors? That's the question we put to the American public.
I'm not sure exactly. I mean, I would imagine they're trying to protect their own integrity. And, you know, as politicians do, at political groups, they try to maintain control over a situation, even if it's uncontrollable.
Because they just don't want to put out the money. They don't want to take any responsibility. Why would they?
It's probably something to do with the history of their political leanings, looking to blame people, and that's historically probably the line that they give, and so they're just sticking to that.
Well, as far as I could see, they have a responsibility. This is not the first time that it's happened, and as far as I know, from the past history of the last couple of years, I think it's gone from something like 100,000 to about 5 million. Something of that. I'm not sure if I have the numbers correctly. But they do have a responsibility to make sure that there's not overcrowding and there is not this madness. I know they were throwing stones at the devil at the point, and then there are these surges that happen. But there has to be something that I don't know what it is that they have to do, but they have to have some preventative measures against that.
That could possibly just be an easy scapegoat. I don't think it's right to blame a disaster on people that are coming into the country. I don't.
I guess it's the point of foreign battles. I guess I'm not really sure how to word it. Like the foreign, I don't know. It's a weird thing, but I guess when you put religious matters into it, people get very offensive and stuff like that. So I guess foreign matters, I guess, is how to word it. I don't know. I said that a bunch of times.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if they want a scapegoat, so it's easier to blame pilgrims rather than take responsibility and liability for the event.
Well, I definitely think Saudi Arabia for a long time has been denying human rights issues within the country. And I think just in general, people are becoming aware of it more and more. And I think in the region, there's been a ton of racial issues that are undeniable. Definitely also a class issue. I think that probably the richer people who live there are of a certain race and can definitely affect the media, can affect and also the government are in control. So that's definitely probably the biggest aspect of why.
Probably because you see a crane coming down, so if you don't move fast enough, Saudi Arabia sees it as your fault.
We asked our experts why the Saudi authorities seem to prefer blaming the pilgrims instead of reviewing their own crowd control measures.
I think the reason is, to be honest, seeing Saudi blaming the pilgrims is nothing new. Saudi Arabia's behavior generally in most interactions with people is that they're right, others are wrong. So with the pilgrims, rather than take the pressure and be held to account, they'd rather focus on others and look at their mismanagement.
Well, it's really a quite clear concept that those who organize an event of this size, they have to be responsible for health and safety of those who attend. And indeed, especially if they are going to use restriction on the movement, restriction on the create corridors with the fences and so forth, those have to be in such a way that will be never blocked and people could flow through it easily. And indeed, if there is a problem, they could evacuate people with a tremendous speed. Because let's face it, if there was a fire attached to this incident, it would have been even greater disaster. They have not been able, and they've been incompetent of actually assessing the health and safety of the Hajj. And that is really a very fundamental issue. And the fact that they're not even able to accept that responsibility actually makes it much worse.
Why has Saudi Arabia been declaring a significantly lower death toll of several hundreds versus the vast majority of local reports of several thousands? We invited the public to speculate.
Because that's what they do. Governments lie, right? What else can I tell you? I mean, that's all I have to say about that.
Probably a combination of them being ashamed with with what has happened, in an attempt to cover up the event, and I think that they, as a government, once again they've been denying these issues. So I think they're trying to make it appear as if they are a little bit more humane than they are.
Again, not knowing much of the facts, I would assume it's the same principle. They try to maintain that there's a control over the situation that maybe isn't there.
Probably to make their infrastructure seem stronger and hardier than it was, and to appear less damaged by the incident.
Probably standard government practice, regardless of the government. Whenever there's some sort of death that makes the government look bad, they try to play it down.
There's always the matter of death toll. Nobody wants death involved with their country, so the rumors, I guess, they can lower it just to make sure people don't go into a chaos state.
To sort of dull it down on a global perspective, I mean, you can't really do much to make light of it on a local perspective because everyone knows exactly what happened, but elsewhere people are going to get more watered down information, so I guess they can do that to sort of keep it not exactly under wraps, but more,
Damage control, just to minimize the event, take attention away from the tragedy.
Sounds political to me. That's how I feel. Basically, they're just trying to, make a bad situation better, even though it's not better, it's worse.
Can our experts explain why Saudi Arabia seems determined to underestimate the Hajj real death toll?
To be honest, I'm not entirely sure why they're downplaying it. If that is the case, it may just be that the numbers are coming through slowly for them. So I wouldn't want to speculate on that. But we have seen in the past that people do try to, again, it's a massive PR disaster for them. They pride themselves on having the Hajj and managing it, and they've done a very poor job. So I think it's if this is true, it'd be in their interest for the numbers to be downplayed, just because they don't need that pressure.
Well, we have to understand the culture in Saudi Arabia. Bad news is always buried in Saudi Arabia, and they're doing what they're used to do it. Anything happens, they just ignore it taking place and bury it like a dead body, and try to actually write the days and months afterward. But this is not something that could be treated in that way. The reality is that first they were saying, hundreds, and you can't really confuse the bodies of thousands with the bodies of hundreds. I mean, this is, it's outrageous. But also, as it went on, they increased the death toll for different countries, but they're not increasing the death toll overall. So still they're saying 700 and odd, but places like Iran and others have actually doubled the number of deaths that has been officially accepted and announced. So really it goes back to this concept that, lie, hide the truth, and write and actually say you're not responsible, it wasn't a big thing, and so forth. And that actually, I think, is the heart of another reason why people are saying they are incompetent, they really are not able and capable of fulfilling this role of looking after the Hajj, because they're not even willing to accept responsibility. They want to say, and they are saying it very clearly, that they are in charge, but they will take no responsibility. That's outrageous. You can't be in charge and not be responsible.
Why do you think that Saudi Arabia does not allow officials from Muslim-majority countries to identify the dead bodies? That's what we asked the public.
I have no idea, other than, again, they're trying to control the situation internally. And if groups or individuals from other countries come in, that may be exposed to some things they've done.
I'm not sure, but I would assume that Saudi Arabia is trying to connect with the Western world and maintain sort of reputation within the Western world, and Muslim leaders may identify the death toll as much higher because of the people who probably died who were Muslim.
That I couldn't tell you. I don't know. I don't know why they're doing what they're doing, but it's typical. It's par for the course is all I can say. I don't know. I have no idea why they don't want to identify the dead bodies.
I think they're just hoping the whole thing goes away on its own without more of an incident.
It just could be fear to their reputation.
Oh, it's the long-standing animosity between the various religious sects there.
I am absolutely not sure.
Oh, that's hard to say. I mean, well, if they were to do that, then they would have to acknowledge the actual death toll, I suppose.
Do our experts have a clear view on the reasons behind Saudi Arabia's refusal to allow officials from Muslim-majority countries to identify the dead?
I've been quite surprised actually the way that they've managed the whole thing. You know, when the initial stories came out, and even now when people are wanting from different countries to identify their own dead, I think the reason why they aren't really going down that route is just because they don't want to deal with the pressure. I mean, it's a lot of pressure they'll have to deal with from different Muslims from around the world, and even within their own country that will say, well, hang on, this isn't the first time it's happened, what's going to be done to address this? Because the reality is Saudi doesn't want that pressure. I mean, there's a lot of anger at them already for the way they've meddled in other Muslim countries, the way they've kind of destabilized the region, and how they've kind of been in bed with people like Israel and America. So the last thing they need is for other Muslim countries to feel emboldened by what's happened and be asking more questions.
I think the fact that they're trying to keep everybody out, including governments who have got their citizens involved. I mean, in any sort of disaster, anywhere in the world, any government will invite others to come and help and to support, to actually identify people, to process people, to make less of the sort of taxing of the event on those who have died, those who have been injured, and their families and relatives of them. The fact that Saudi Arabian regime is going against that is again because they want to hide things. They don't want to be upfront with people. They don't want to admit what has taken place, and indeed find remedies, and indeed apologize if it's necessary, and move forward, learn from your mistake and move forward. I mean, there are CCTVs for all these routes. None of them have been actually shown. None of them have been exposed. We could see exactly what's taken place, but they don't want us to see. They want to hide everything, and they want to create perceptions and lies out of this process of hiding everything.
When Saudi officials say that the incident happened merely because God wanted it to happen, what does this say about the regime's approach to accountability? We invited the public to comment.
I don't know. I think that stuff sounds kind of self-fulfilling. What word do I say?
Something happens, they say, "Well, God wanted it."
Like a lot of people do that. It's an act of God if it's something that you can't control or went bad against you. Whereas if it's something that goes well in your favor, it's something you did.
Well, there isn't. They don't want to have any accountability. They want to say it's out of their hands. It happened because there was structural malfunctioning for years. They don't want to put out the money, so.
Oh, the regime's approach to accountability is that, their approach to their life, I believe, does not hold themselves accountable for their actions or what happens to them. So their cause and effect is completely diverting to a higher power.
No, basically, we all have, wills, and it really doesn't have to happen. And even though I believe in God, I don't believe that it's God's, purpose that these people die. They have a way to, stop this death and control history. Not blame it on God.
It's not responsible at all. I mean, it's definitely a tragedy, but I don't think it's right for local officials to try to be pulling the wool over the public's eyes on some stuff like that, and like making kind of silly efforts to try to, because like, I mean, what are you going to do about a crane falling down? That's engineering issues, if anything.
Yeah, it's not justification. Like, there's certain things in like the justice system where it's like, if you did it, regardless of why you say you did it. It has to. There's consequences for everything that happens, I guess.
It's the same thing. They're shifting the blame towards a non-official entity rather than blaming the construction company, I suppose, or whomever is operating the crane, whomever is an inspector for safety standards. You know, any number of those people might be accountable. But rather than do that, if you shift blame in a religious country towards, a religious body, then that might, mitigate some of the responsibility of the construction company.
They only seem accountable to God, but that seems like the most ridiculous answer.
Can you expound on that further?
I mean, unless by God they mean the guy organizing the journey, which is a government official, seems a little convenient to say it's God's will instead of just planning it better.
It shows that they really don't care about accountability and are more considered with reputation.
How do our experts interpret Saudi claims that a higher power caused these deaths?
I think it was best said, it was in a Guardian article about how that it's, whenever someone dies, it's God's will, according to Saudi. And the thing is, yes, God may have said it's their time, but that doesn't take away accountability from the organisers. I think it says a lot about Saudi's mentality. What they want to do is saying, come on guys, leave it. Let's not talk about this. Let's not talk about how I've messed up. And that's what it is, because they have messed up. But the more questions that are asked, the more their legitimacy is questioned. You have to understand that many Muslims from around the world and in Saudi Arabia do not give any authority or do not believe or have any stake in the Saudi regime. They think they're despots, they think they're evil, they think they're dictators, and all this story does is add more weight to that issue. So the last thing they need is for Muslims to be asking questions, which is why they try to downplay the whole thing or say it's part of God's master plan. It's ridiculous, but it's the signs of a desperate regime that doesn't want to deal with a PR disaster caused by their mismanagement.
Well, of course, nothing happens in this world without God's will. But we are also very much responsible for our action, for our responsibility. We don't sort of just sit in the corner of the room and say, we leave everything in the hand of God, and that would be ridiculous. We have responsibility to look after things, to organize things, to make sure that things are run smoothly.
Do you believe that a regime which is bombing Muslims abroad in Yemen exercises health and safety for Muslims at home? We asked the public.
I have no idea. It seems, I don't know. I don't know how to answer that.
Definitely not, as described by, or as shown by the fact that they won't let Muslim leaders in to count the bodies. So
It's a mess. My heart goes out to these people who are caught in the crossfire. They're just innocent people. So it's a mess. That's all I can, I feel for them on a daily basis.
Bombing it anywhere isn't really health and safety, I guess. Like, anybody putting themselves in danger isn't really a good situation, I guess, so no.
Not really. I know that they've been an ally. Especially, with the Bushes and people like that. But the thing is, like with the women's rights and things of that nature, they do have ways to come. And as far as Saudi Arabia goes, and I'd bring it to Turkey. Right now you have a problem of extremism, of Muslim extremism, ISIS and Al-Qaeda, that they're doing nothing about in that area. And instead of fighting each other, they could possibly, unify. I mean, you have something like 28,000, 30,000 of ISIS in there. And you got about, between Saudi Arabia and Turkey, you have a couple of million troops. Why can't they just go in and, there are innocent people, Muslims that are being killed by them? Why can't they take an approach to do something constructive instead of just infighting? And that's how I feel.
I don't believe that any regime that bombs any human life is exercising any concern for the world and its future.
I believe that that's it's not the right thing to be doing at all. Doesn't exercise safety, doesn't solve any problems. If anything, it just makes new ones.
Probably not.
I mean, if they let a crane kill a couple thousand people, they're probably not trying that hard to take care of other Muslims or people.
We gave our experts the chance to compare Saudi Arabia's willingness to bomb Muslims in Yemen versus its attitude towards the safety of Muslims at home.
The thing is, there have been so many stories about, uprisings in Saudi Arabia against the regime that have been brutally shut down. So I don't for a second think Saudi goes out of its way to look at, human rights or, maintain, safety for pilgrims or anyone around the world. Saudi's in it for itself. It always has been. That's just the reality of it. It's another nation state created by Britain to help, and is basically all it does is it's a conduit for oil for these other Western countries. Saudi is an illegitimate state in my opinion, and in many Muslims' opinions, and to be honest, most of us will be very glad when we see the back of them.
Well, I will go beyond the fact that the brutality of regime in Yemen and in Bahrain and indeed even in Saudi Arabia. Look, they are. What is really important is those of us who've gone for Hajj, we know how they treat on a day in, day out, the Hujjaj. They treat them like dirt. They actually are very abusive. This is supposed to be those of us who go there are guests of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala according to Islamic principle. We are guests of Allah in the house of Allah. I mean, do they treat their own guests in their own house in this way? No way. But how come, how dare they to actually treat the guest of Allah in the house of Allah in the dirt that they do at best of time, let alone on the occasions that things goes really bad. Any encounter with these officials, it's such a, taxing, it's such a abusive encounter, which is unbelievable. And that also highlights very clearly that they are not capable to discharge their responsibility to look after the guest of Allah in the house of Allah the way that they deserve to be treated.
The death toll has been consistently understated by Saudi authorities, with thousands dead at the scene. The right to act upon one's religious beliefs should be possible without risk of injury or death. Yet Saudi Arabia explains these deaths as the work of a higher power. They stand accused of failing to use their power to protect the innocent from preventable fatalities, which were not the will of a deity, but rather the failure of the will to act by the Saudi authorities. That makes this a political scandal as well as a very human tragedy.